Please be seated.
Proceed, Mr. Evans.
All right, thank you, Judge. During our break, you had an opportunity to look at State Exhibit 387, which, for our record, is a package containing a thumb drive, correct?
Yes.
And since the defense made an issue of it, having looked at this thumb drive, which is included in 387, does this contain all of the photographs and all of the videos and all of the raw data that you took as part of your testing?
It does.
Okay. And you confirm that those photos are fair and accurate? In fact, some of them actually you're depicted in them, correct?
Yes.
And the videos, similarly, those are fair and accurate video recordings of the entire testing process that you gave testimony about?
It is.
Tender States 387, a copy which was previously furnished to the defense as part of reciprocal discovery.
Admitted.
There are over 300 photos on this. We're not going to go through 300 photos, so that's the good news. But just to show, by way of example, some of them. Thumb drive in. ATS testing, and I want to start with the site testing itself. There's a folder in there called Photos, and let's go to, for example, 134. All right, looking at State's Exhibit 134, can you see that where you're seated?
Yes, I can.
Okay. You were not the only person out here testing during this testing process. In addition to yourself, we'll zoom in on this a little bit. Martin Jackson with the medical examiner's office. The jury might recognize him from yesterday. You recognize Martin Jackson here on the end. And then this is Bob Tressel, chief investigator for the district attorney's office. Is that correct?
I recognize Bob, yes.
We'll go to 153 as another example. These folks participating in the testing process and observing from the medical examiner's office and the district attorney's office, as well as the police department. Is that correct?
Yes, the one in the blue shirt was one of an ATS employee.
And then 161, and Martin Jackson. Is that Detective Phil Stoddard, who's seated here on the front row, just outside the table?
It is.
Okay. He was there as well. And then you asked questions about a car seat. I want to show you something. So in photo 41 in the placement photos. All right, looking at 41, this is the car seat that was actually used for the testing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When we look here at this yellow portion of the car seat, which is State's Exhibit 307, we looked at this during the break. You see how part of this is kind of scratched off on this yellow sticker on the right side of that car seat?
Yes.
And similarly, the little portion that's kind of scratched off on this white portion of that car seat as well. Looking at your photograph 40 and comparing that side, does that appear to be the same car seat that you used for the testing?
Well, again, as best I can do is just compare photographs, which the jury can do. But
Sure.
It appears to be the same.
That's the car seat. This is photo number 38.
Yes.
Okay. A few other questions for you. You were asked a question about the vehicle being, I don't know, vacuum sealed or airtight. You don't have any reason to believe that the vehicle that you tested, the Tucson, was entirely airtight, correct?
That's correct.
Would you expect the results of your testing to be different, though, if the vehicle was tested with the doors open or the windows open?
It would depend on what's open, but obviously the more, if you had many doors open, it would make a difference as far as air could actually penetrate or leave the vehicle and provide a mechanism for heat to get in or out as well.
Because the vehicle was closed up during almost the entirety of your testing, these values were higher than you might expect if the vehicle were open during the day, correct?
Compared to something that was wide open, certainly.
Sure. And I want to talk about that for a minute. To completely replicate the scenario that we're investigating in this case, were you asked at some point to actually briefly access the vehicle at one point during the day?
Yes, I was.
And about what time did you actually access the vehicle to replicate the exact scenario from June the 18th of 2014?
About 12:45 in the afternoon.
All right. Is that the only time that you access the vehicle, other than the placement of the thermocouples and removing the testing after the day of testing?
That's the only time.
You were asked about the impact of a human being potentially being in the vehicle. Might it matter whether that human being was a 22-month-old versus a grown adult male?
In the sense, from a heat transfer standpoint, part of a body's ability to interact from a heating standpoint is their capacity to contain heat.
Judge, I'm going to object, I'm sorry. He had previously testified that this was outside of the scope and outside of his area of expertise, and so I would object to that question.
What do you say?
I disagree. He's obviously got an answer to that based on his experience as an expert in heat transfer. So I think it's fair game for cross-examination if Mr. Rodriguez wants to do that, but it's a fair question for this witness if he can answer the question. If he can't, I trust he'll tell me that.
Overrule the objection.
Can you answer that question?
Yes, in the sense that not so much whether it's a human body or not, but whatever the object is, the more mass to the object, the more that's one of the factors in how it would interact from a heat transfer standpoint. So from that basis, a small person versus a bigger person, the bigger person would have more mass and it would be more heat generation and more interaction with the cabin air, essentially.
Under what circumstances would a human being in that vehicle stop having an impact on the temperature inside the vehicle? At what point?
I wouldn't say not so much when it would stop. Oh.
I'm going to object as well. That is outside of the scope and expertise. He was not asked, and he testified repeatedly on cross, that he was not asked to determine the effect of a human body on the air cabin temperature during his testing on July the 8th, 2014.
I overrule the objection.
Again, in the sense of not so much a person, but just as an object at a temperature, that if any object is at a temperature that's lower than the air temperature, it would be giving off heat to the air. If that object achieves a temperature that's the same as the air temperature, then it's neutral, there's no heat transfer. And if that object or body is at a temperature less, so for example, if that body were at, say, to pick a temperature 100 degrees Fahrenheit, once the air cabin temperature is above 100, that body is taking heat from the air. Prior to that time, the body would be contributing heat to the air. So at some point, heat's either going from the body or to it, and that would depend on the body's temperature relative to the air temperature around it.
But with a human being, say at 98 degrees, wherever that may be, once the temperature exceeds 98 degrees, that person would no longer be a contributor to the rising temperature. Would that person any longer be a contributor once the temperature exceeds?
Again, if the body itself, for example, is at 98 degrees Fahrenheit and the air around it, it's neutral. So it would just depend on that body's temperature.
You were asked about the drift effect, and I want to talk about that too. You were also asked about the start time of the testing. If you had started the time later, what impact, if any, might that have on the lunchtime temperature when you access the vehicle?
If I had started it later with the same air conditioning settings, then by lunchtime, its only impact would result in a lower temperature at lunch.
It would actually be cooler at lunch.
Yes,
Okay. And
if it had an impact.
similarly, if we went with the drift, which is drift downward, is that correct?
That's correct.
If we went with the drift rather than your expert opinion about the temperature in the vehicle, would that be lower or higher than what you have displayed here in your graph?
It would depend on where, but for example, at 1136, where we did the restart, it would be on the order of 6 degrees lower than what's represented on the chart.
So even with the drift values at lunchtime, the temperature would be less.
Yes, it would be on the order of, at 1136, for example, when we did the restart, the drift value would be on the order of 82 degrees Fahrenheit, as opposed to what's on the graph at 88.
There was a question posed to you about how this graph might look different if the air conditioning wasn't run at all in the morning. In terms of the end results towards the end of the day, would you expect them to differ at all if you had not run the air conditioner or run it at a lower level?
No, I would not.
And why is that?
Because again, the primary factors generating the way the heat goes and the way the temperatures respond are going to be the sunlight and the outdoor air temperature. And in particular, with the sun on the vehicle, it's such a big impact that it would overwhelm any initial cooling as you went further in the day.
Part of the reason that you documented 387 photographically and by video, is that so somebody could go back and replicate this process if they wanted to?
Yes, in terms of any type of testing I do, a key ingredient for me is to make sure that all the variables that are pertinent are registered as far as what we did and the methodology. From a scientific standpoint, the thought is that someone else could reproduce the testing and if things are done correctly, would expect the same results. So to that end, doing things like video and photography was trying to make sure I was as transparent as possible about the methodology and the conditions of that day.
Has any other expert from either side contacted you asking you to provide this other than us to give it in discovery?
Not that I'm aware of, other than just whatever data I provided to your office, my understanding is at one point it was provided to the defense.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about the sunlight and the conditions on June the 18th of 2014. You weren't present on that day at Home Depot, correct?
Certainly not.
All right. Now, if there were video surveillance, such as that contained on 317, which has previously been shown to the jury, that certainly would demonstrate what the lighting conditions were on the day of June the 18th of 2014, would it not?
Again, I've not seen the video, but if the video can allow someone to detect when they see shadows, which would indicate clouds versus direct sunlight, that information would be helpful to consider.
All right. And I know that you testified that you're not a forensic pathologist or medical doctor, so the impact of heat on a human being, that's not what you're here to testify about, is that correct?
That's correct, and that's why these earlier questions, I'm couching in terms of just a inanimate body at a temperature. When I was discussing wet mass and things like that just a moment ago.
But, for example, a forensic pathologist could certainly describe what impact it might have on a human.
I'm going to object, pause for speculation.
I'll move on to a different area.
Yes.
Based on everything that you have talked about here and looking at the graph displayed for the jury, also on 385, is it your expert opinion that this is an accurate gauge of the temperature inside that vehicle for the summer of 2014?
It is, with the date of my testing, yes.
I think that's all I have.
Recross.
Thank you. You said that the videos of June the 18th, if they show sunlight and shadows, that would be, those are your words, important to consider?
Well, again, I think it would be important to consider the videos. Not having seen them, I don't know what they depict, but if there's information that could be gained with the video with regard to what the sun was doing and what the cloud coverage was, it would certainly be of interest, I would think, to look into.
And you weren't asked to look into it. To be fair, you weren't asked to look into those videos.
No, I was not.
The car seat. Obviously, you were under the impression that this was, or that the car seat that was inside the vehicle when you did testing on July the 8th was a different car seat than the original?
Yes, that was my testimony earlier. This was done about 2 years ago, and that was my recollection then. I do know that ATS actually bought an exemplar that we used in our shop to do some pre-work and setting up. And based on the photographic evidence that this is the actual car seat, then I may have mixed those two things in my mind.
Okay. You'd agree that at ATS, Applied Technical Services, you have ready access to leading experts in various scientific fields that are relevant to the forensic work with which you are involved?
Yes, in fact, that's a statement I believe that was in my report to the Cobb County government.
Okay. Yet your research into how hot it gets in vehicles that causes children to tragically die can be summarized by a 2-hour Google search and, as best as you can recall, one publication from Australia?
Yes, but again, if the scope of my work had been to answer that type of a question, like a pathologist type question, that level of work may be different for a person answering that question. All my research was simply done was to, based on the test methodology I had in mind, was to see what others had done, to see if the techniques I was employing were what others had done, and that was the case. And that and looking at some of their results to compare my post results to, those were the two items of interest in my research. And certainly whatever that amount was, be it 2 or 3 hours, was sufficient for what that task was. As far as doing anything beyond that with how a child interacts in a hot car, that was not part of the scope of work I needed to pay attention to for the work I'm presenting here. So no, I didn't do that type of research.
That's not what you were paid $24,000 to do, correct?
The research of the pathologist. What I was being paid for, our company was being reimbursed for, was to determine what the internal temperature was on July 8th, 2014, in order to provide that data for Cobb County to see fit to use in this trial. And that was the scope of my work.
Nothing further.
You may step down.
And just make sure, before you leave, you make sure you don't have any of our exhibits with you. I think I've got them. Thank you, sir.
Next witness, please.
They would call Lauren Jamar. Ma'am, could you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury by telling them your name and then spelling it so the court reporter gets it right?
Lauren Jamar, Laurenjamar.
And Ms. Jamar, where do you live?
I live in Los Angeles, California,
Okay. How long you lived there?
all of my life.
All right. It's really not relevant to why you're here, but I just thought I'd ask you. Okay. What do you do in California?
I work for Whisper as the Director of Content Operations.
Okay. What does that mean? What's your job duties generally?
So I come up with the guidelines and standards for our user-generated content from a community safety and a moderation perspective.
And what is Whisper? So you said Whisper. What is that?
Whisper is a media company. We also have an application.
So when you say a media company and an application, how is one different from the other?
So Whisper, the app, users can interact with one another via the app, whereas the website is just reading user-generated content.
Okay. as part of your job at Whisper, are you basically the custodian of records? If you get a request from law enforcement or somebody like that for certain records, are you the person who will get the records together, find out, okay, these are the accurate records, and then produce them to law enforcement?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you what I marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 388, which contains an envelope with 389, 390, 391, 392, and 393. Showing you State's Exhibit 388. Just ask you to take a look at that. Indeed, looking at the second page, do you recognize this?
Yes.
Okay, how do you recognize it?
This is my signature on the second page. I received these documents.
And is that a certification that all the discs that were provided to you were actually authentic records kept in the ordinary course of business by Whisper?
Correct.
Okay, Your Honor, I tender State's 388 at this time.
Any objection?
I'm sorry, Chuck, 388 was?
388 is the business cert and the envelope, and then I'm going to pull out and introduce the other CDs.
Okay. Judge, I'm going to object just on the basis is that we previously argued, particularly the 404, 403 character severance, those that we've dealt with previously. I'd like to just maintain my objection, please.
All right. We'll allow them over that objection.
And now I'm just going to ask you to look at 389 through 393. Ask you if you recognize those.
I do.
How do you recognize those?
I reviewed these and put my initials on them.
Okay. And were those records actually 5 different discs involving records that were obtained or requested by Cobb County Police Department from your business?
That's correct.
And those fair and accurate records from the business that you maintained in the ordinary course of business?
That's correct.
Okay, Your Honor, I tender State's Exhibit 389 through 393.
Same objection.
Same objections, please.
Same rule.
Now, I'm just going to have you read out these numbers right here. These probably mean absolutely nothing to you, but just for the record, to correlate later with the State's Exhibit. Okay, looking at State's Exhibit 389, it says whisper response.
15SW0216.
And each one of these discs, is this relevant to some different user or an old business certification?
Correct.
Okay. Looking at states 390, it says Whisper, and then what is that?
15SW0258.
States Exhibit 391. I've got it upside down.
15SW0259.
392.
15SW0260.
And finally, excuse me, 393. What's that say?
CERT.
Okay. Was there originally these records? Were these originally provided by Whisper some time ago, a couple of years ago?
Correct.
Okay. And were those provided by a different employee that you used to work with who no longer works there?
That is correct.
And what's her name?
Nona Farinick.
Now, you just talked about those discs, a little bit about Whisper. As far as the application, how does the application work generally?
So users can post thoughts or anything that's on their mind, essentially.
Mhm.
They post it on the app, and it's overlaid with an image. So based on their text, we serve an image, and it's posted to the community, Whisper community.
Okay, so basically there's a picture and then writing over it. Somebody wants to make a comment, it's writing in front of a picture, basically.
Correct.
Okay, and do you get to pick the picture, the person posting it, or does Whisper automatically give a photograph?
We'll give a series of
Okay.
suggested images, and users can also choose their own photos.
Okay. And when you say the Whisper community, is this a public forum, or do you actually have to sign up for it, or tell the jury a little bit about that?
It's public. We don't collect any personal data from our users, meaning they don't have to sign up using their name or email address or phone number, any of that. When they join the service, meaning when they download the app, they're assigned a non-unique username that they can change or keep should they choose.
So basically, I guess is it the attempt to allow the user to remain as anonymous as possible?
Sure, we do provide that platform for anonymity.
And when these posts, somebody posts something on Whisper, are other people or Whisper users able to respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. Are they allowed to or able to respond publicly?
Yes, the reply is public.
And what type of replies can you do?
You can heart, which is equivalent to a Facebook like. You can reply by creating another Whisper in reply to that Whisper, or you can start a private chat.
But generally, these usernames from time to time can be something different every time.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, do you also have a platform? I don't know if platform is the right term, but it sounded good at the time. Do you have a way that you can actually message another person privately on Whisper? Say they post something, and then you send them a private message. Can you do that?
You can.
Okay. And how does that work? Is it like Facebook Messenger or something? Does it kind of go on to a different conversation or?
Right. That's private. We can't monitor or see any private chats, but they can start private chats from a Whisper post.
Okay. Now, do you guys maintain any records of private chats between users?
Not at all.
Okay, so there would be no way for law enforcement themselves, just from Whisper, to get conversations on private messaging.
That's correct.
Okay. Can they get records of public posts as to who has posted something?
Correct.
Okay. Now, is it as easy as just saying, hey, I want to, if John Smith has a Whisper account, we want all his stuff. Is it that easy?
No, because
Okay.
we don't collect any personal data from a person named John Smith. It's
Okay.
a non-unique username.
How does law enforcement go about generally trying to identify a set of records or a user to obtain records for them?
They have to provide a public post, the text of a public post, or they can also provide the username.
And when they do that, what type of information do you guys Whisper, maintain, and what are you able to provide about that user? Any identifying information?
If that user had their location services enabled on their device at the time of posting a Whisper, we are able to see their IP and or their geo-lat long at the time of the Whisper post.
Okay. So IP address, is that their IP address?
Correct.
Basically, is that something that can track where their computer's located?
I don't know how IPs work.
Okay.
But,
Well, I'll withdraw the question then. I don't want to get into speculating about that. And the geo-lat, what did you call it?
geo-lat and long,
Okay, and what is that?
latitude and longitude,
Okay.
at the time that the post was created.
So it does reflect that you guys have at least the location, if they had their location services on, of where the post was done, some general area.
Some general area, correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have, Judge.
have been here about a week and a half ago.
A party?
It was a hurricane.
I know, that's what I was referring to.
And I don't mean the beverage hurricane. Just a couple things. Is it Jamar?
Correct.
And I couldn't catch if it was Laura or Lauren.
Lauren.
Lauren?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Whisper. How do you get signed up for it? If I want to be, if I want to have that app, how do I get signed up for your product?
If you want the app, you go to your app store and download the app.
Okay.
That's all.
And is it free of charge?
It is.
How do y'all make your money if the app is free of charge?
I do not know how.
That's
else
over your
we're making
pay grade,
money.
right?
It is definitely over my pay grade.
Okay. Well, let's say I was gonna go on my phone and download the app today. Is there any sort of age restriction for me being able to download it, however old I might be?
No.
Okay. So I can download it if I'm 12, I can download it if I'm 102.
If you have access to an app store, you can download the app, although in the app store we are 17 plus.
Okay. What does that mean?
That's how Whisper has classified itself.
All right, so if I go into the App Store, there would be, and I went to Whisper, there would be some sort of statement or warning that this app is for users 17 years of age or older?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you got any way to monitor or ensure that users aren't under 17?
No,
Okay. Why 17?
I don't know.
Again, that's, somebody else makes that decision.
That's
that
correct.
policy decision.
That's correct.
Okay. It has nothing to do with the law in California, as far as you know, versus the law in Georgia.
Not to my understanding, but I do not know.
All right. And tell us a little bit about your customer base. How many users, let's just say nationwide in the U.S., how many users would you typically have of that app at any given time?
That's hard to say, I don't know.
Okay. Would it be in the millions?
Of users?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And is the app available in Canada and Mexico and the rest of the Americas?
That is correct.
All right. What about in Europe?
Yes.
Okay. Is it pretty much worldwide?
Yes, there are some countries we're not in, I would assume, but yes.
Okay. And is there any part of the U.S. where you have more users, where the company where the app is more popular?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. You don't do data tracking and that sort of stuff?
I do not, no.
You do not? All right. If we were to ask any specifics about usernames and that kind of information, you don't really deal in the sort of the more technical aspects of how the application works, do you?
I do not.
Do not, okay. What is your title?
Director of Content Operations.
Content Operations. All right. Do you spend a lot of time doing what it is you're doing today, going to different locations to identify documents for court and whatnot?
No, I do not.
Okay. How often have you had to do something like this?
This is my first time.
First time, okay. Well, what do you normally do as Director of Content Operations?
I monitor the content, user-generated content, come up with the guidelines for our user-generated content from a community safety perspective,
Okay.
as well as from a moderation perspective.
And how long have you been in that capacity?
A little over 2 years.
Have you implemented some new safety protocols and guidelines for the kind of information that Whisper now deems appropriate and safe?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question or repeat the question?
Mm-hmm. Since you've been in the job, have y'all implemented any new guidelines regarding content safety? What might be safe or appropriate for Whisper content?
No, not since I've been in this role.
Okay. And if this is outside of what you do, tell me, but my understanding is that if I want to post an image, if I want to post a post, I can type out the text, and then the app can assign perhaps a random image to go with that text that I'm typing, or that I want to post?
Correct, that is an option.
Okay. Or there's an option that I could actually choose the image that's going to go with my text, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Are those the only two ways that the image and the text can be matched together before posting?
No. So the user also can upload an image from their device.
Okay.
And not use one of the hundreds of images that we may have suggested.
Okay. Is that option, or the availability of uploading images, has that always been part of the platform?
Correct.
Okay. So if I wanted to say something about my chihuahuas, I could actually upload a picture of them and then type in the text over the image, right?
That is correct.
Do you have the ability to limit the area or areas in which your posts are broadcast?
No.
Okay. Do you know if the app has some sort of algorithm that does that itself?
I do not know.
Okay. Just for example, if I were to post something here from St. Simons or Brunswick, would it show up in Corona, California?
Yes.
It would. Okay. And it is, as far as you know, you think you've probably got more than 1 million users in the continental U.S.
Correct.
of the app. Has that been a fairly consistent number for the last couple of years since you've been in this position?
Yes.
Enjoy Georgia.
Just a couple follow-up. When you were talking about the whole, you guys say, you're required to be 17 to use the app. Basically, can somebody just go on and say, yeah, I'm really 18, and click? Or 17, I mean?
Yes.
Okay. So there's really no way to monitor that. I know you haven't testified before. As a part of your job, do you, on a pretty consistent basis, have to, or sometimes have to provide records to law enforcement as a part of their investigation?
Yes.
Because I guess sometimes you may have users who are maybe underage, correct?
Sure.
And then you may have people out there wanting to do ill to a minor, correct?
Sure.
Thank you.
You don't have a truth requirement either.
I'm sorry?
You don't have a truth requirement to post something, do you?
I'm not sure I understand the
Well,
question.
Whatever I type and post doesn't really have to be true, does it? I mean, I could post that I'm 6 feet tall and that wouldn't be true. You don't have to answer that.
Can I? No, never mind. No further questions.
You have a chronologically short witness.
We don't. In fact, I was going to ask to approach about that. Our next chronologically shorter witness is arriving during the lunch hour. Agreed? Yes.
Well, we'll take a break then. Let's recess till 1 o'clock for the jurors to have their lunch. Everyone, take your notepads, close them up. You know the drill. Open mind, close mouth, enjoy each other's company.